Right guys, Fabian at Ignite Automotive here. I'm talking to you today about crank hubs on S55s. We'll go through a few bits, show you what we do, what we replace, and how we do it basically. I'm gonna go through the original crank hub now. So this is the original crank hub. I took it out of a car on Friday. This is made up of 3 separate items. As you saw, a piece of metal just fell out there. I'll show you that in a second. So this is made up of 3 separate items: the hub, the timing chain gear, and the oil pump gear. These are held on the end of the crank via a very large bolt. The issue is these bolts come loose, which allow the chain to spin, because these will spin freely. What holds these tight is the bolt and also these little washers here, which are called friction discs. This one is a perfectly fine one. It's nice and tight still. I have other ones which have snapped, and I've had to put a magnet on this one because I can't pick it up. But the inner edges are all breaking out of it because this one actually did spin. So this one, luckily, he didn't damage any valves. We were able to save the engine, which was very good. If he was going any quicker or it was worse, he'd have had to have an engine build, unfortunately. The new crank hub is a Insane Performance crank hub. We only fit Insane Performance purely because I've been fitting them for 6 years nearly, and I've never had an issue with them. These crank hubs are one complete solid piece. I'll hold this one up next to it. These spin on the stock one. On the Insane one, they are completely solid, they do not turn. To benefit that as well, there are 4 pins on the end, which what we have to do is put this nice die, which is supplied by Insane Performance, into the crank, and we drill through a certain amount of depth for the pins to locate into the end of the crank. Now, this has never failed for me. I'm pretty sure that Insane have never seen them fail either. There is other brands out there and different ways of doing it, but we say that Insane is the best option. We do offer a 2 or a 4-pin crank hub. 9 times out of 10 everyone goes for a 4-pin because you'd say more pins, more safe. Less likely for it to spin, but again, I've never heard of a 2-pin one spinning either. So there is that. People do put capture plates on a stock crank hub, which is a plate which goes over the end of the bolt. I have still seen them spin, and I've seen them break the capture plate as well. So we don't recommend capture plates, but we do recommend a crank hub fix on every car, even though it's stock power or not. It's something you can't see. It doesn't make your car go quicker, but it makes it safe. Along with the crank hub, when we replace it, we don't just replace the crank hub. We replace the stock OEM bolt with a new bolt, because this is a stretch bolt. So when we torque this up, we can't use it again. So this goes in the bin after use. We replace both cam gear bolts, because again, they are like the crank bolt, they are stretch bolts. They do not get put back in. So along with the cam bolts and the crank bolt, we replace the timing chain tensioner washer, because obviously it's just an aluminium washer, it does need replacing. Very large sump gasket, because with every crank hub which we drill, we remove the sump. Some companies are saying that they don't need to remove the sump for it, but when we drill there is swarf, and the swarf will get everywhere unless you're careful. And the only way of being 100% sure is removing the sump, so hence you need a sump gasket. Along with the sump gasket, we do replace the crank seal. Inside the box is a protective box, so it does protect the crank seal itself. The fuel pump gear cover, which is needed to remove the secondary chain, so we do need to replace that. Every single rocker cover we take off gets a rocker cover gasket. We use OEM dealer parts on all of these. There's no point using aftermarket because they're not suffice. Along with removing the sump, you have a nice big bag here of aluminium bolts. A lot of people don't replace these, but these are, again, one use only, and they're aluminium. And the torque on them is so little, they're very easy to snap. They come in a bag, they're really not that expensive. None of these parts are really that expensive. The labor is the expensive part. These bolts need to be replaced every single time. They are stretch bolts, they are Loctited from factory, and you will snap them if you try to reuse them. So basically that's a quick overview of the crank hub. Let's move on to the car and we can see what I do. So I've now got the rocker cover removed. At this point in time, we're going to time the engine up so we can then remove the timing chain, because we need to do that to get to the crank hub. Great opportunity to do a cam alignment as well. So this customer is actually having a cam alignment, as half the work's already done. It'll only be the labour to actually align the camshaft. And also he's having spark plugs as well, which is a slight step colder spark plug. And again, there's no extra labour because I have to remove them to do the crank hub. It just allows me to turn the engine over easier. see, I've just torqued up the crank bolt. We're going to start rebuilding the rest of the engine. It is a complete reverse of what you've already seen my colleagues stripping down. So along with the crank hub on this job, we are checking and inspecting the rod bearings and replacing if required. So I've pulled out cylinder 3s and 4 rod bearing and cap. As you'll be able to see that they are highly worn, we do recommend to replace these. We don't just chuck dealer bearings in. That's not how you should fit bearings. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using plastic gauge. We're going to be measuring the actual clearances, the oil clearances of the bearings, but we are going to be using ACL race bearings and ARP bolts. We either fit ARP bolts or new dealer bolts. It's down to customers' preference really on price and availability. These bolts are around £300 more than dealer bolts, so it's quite expensive. You can see the underside of the engine and the bearings themselves. But yeah, each bearing will be measured, and if we need to do anything about the clearances, we can assess from there and get undersized bearings. But normally these do measure up quite well within tolerance. As you've seen in the video, torqued up the first bearing. I'm going to continue on and do the rest. Once I've done that, I'm going to carry on and rebuild the rest of the car. Hope you've liked the video. If you want any more information or want to get your S55 in, just drop us an email, Instagram message us, or phone us. All the details will be below. And yeah, let us know how we did.